Hi viewers, today we are going to discuss a special subject, health, and at the same time education. So our special guest has a lot of information about it, and our special guest is Nick Parr.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Nick, and thank you for joining us. Please tell our viewers about your early days and your qualifications.
In this field, my first experience was working as a volunteer at a disability sport event in Wakefield, working with young children with learning disabilities at an athletics event. And that voluntary experience, that time brought me then into a position where I was working across Yorkshire, now working with an organisation called the Federation of Disability Sport. And we've worked with a range of different sports across schools in West, North, East and South Yorkshire. And then eventually into a national role working specifically with people with learning disabilities. And my present role is managing the International Federation for Intellectual Impairment Sport, which is another way of saying learning disability.
At what stage you decided that you are going to join this profession as a teacher or as a mentor?
The voluntary experience that I mentioned happened quite by chance. It came about as part of a university sports management degree, and we were expected to go and deliver a live event as part of that course. So I guess my first introduction came around a little bit by chance, but it was very clear that it was an area that I enjoyed and wanted to work in. A little bit of luck that the right opportunities came up at the right time. But now I've been in this field for something like about coming up to 15, 16, 17 years. And I still learn something every day that's new. I still come across new challenges, and there is always too much to do. There is always far too much work for the time and money available, but it's an area that I've always enjoyed and hopefully have been able to give a contribution to.
Tell us about your childhood, where you did your early education in schools.
Well, I've lived in Sheffield almost all my life. Just outside of Sheffield in Dronfield is where I went to school. I was then away for a few years at Keele University near Stoke-on-Trent, but came back to Sheffield to start the sports work and have been here ever since. My current role, as I mentioned, is with an international federation, an international governing body for the sport. And I was really pleased a few years ago to have the opportunity to bring that into Sheffield. Sheffield is now its worldwide base, and I get to work in my home city doing the job that I enjoy.
We'll talk about Sheffield later on, but please tell us about your experience as a teacher when you are teaching health and physical education and all these activities to the students.
Yeah, so I mean, nowadays I guess I'm not involved in the delivery quite in that way, but certainly earlier in my career, we used to go out to schools working with teachers. It might be a mainstream school that supports disabled children, and we were helping them to develop and adapt PE sessions to make sure that all students could be involved at whatever level of sport they were competing or simply taking part. And we've also done a lot of education and training, so going out to maybe sports centre staff, local authority, leisure centres, governing bodies of sport, people working in athletics and swimming and table tennis and others. Really anybody who has an involvement in delivering sport, helping them to make it more inclusive, more open and accessible to people with a disability. And more recently, as I said, that has been with people with a learning disability, but across those years, it's actually covered a range of different groups.
So is there any special schools for these people, or you are going to help them in the same state schools or the private schools?
Yep, so a few years ago, there was a move by the government to actually move a lot of disabled children from special schools into mainstream education. And that has, without doubt, had a lot of benefits and a lot of a good positive impact on a lot of the children involved. But I think it's also recognised that it isn't always appropriate for every child, and so special schools certainly do exist, and they do a fantastic role for the children that attend them. working internationally, it's quite interesting to see the different models that different countries employ. Even in our immediate neighbours in Europe, there are quite different philosophies and approaches to education and the provision of sport for disabled children. And certainly when you go further afield into Africa, into particularly South, Central, Latin America, and across to Asia, a very different approach, whether it's special segregated schools, whether it's inclusive schools, a mix of the two. And that also has an impact, of course, on the way the sports system works and how young people can get involved in sport and physical activity.
Nick, you have global experience about this sport, and especially for the disabled children. So if I will say, if I will give you the authority to pick up the system, which country's system you find it best for the UK if we have to adopt a system from other countries? So which system you will opt for this country?
That's a very difficult question because it depends what you want to get out of that system. If you want high caliber athletes winning gold medal at the top competitions, then without a doubt approaches that countries like the UK have taken, where you saw the performance of the Great Britain team in the Rio Paralympics or going back to London and others. The governing bodies of sport are very much behind disabled athletes. They get the same opportunity to train in the top venues with the top coaches, with the top sports science background and everything else. So clearly, if that's your ambition, then that is a model that works. In other areas, and even, as I mentioned, going to close neighbours in France, in Portugal and others, the system is a little different, but they have literally tens tens of thousands of athletes that they are working with. It is a much broader model, and it isn't just about the top few medal-winning athletes at the top of their sport, but a much broader opinion. And I think for participation, more social outcome, I would look to those nations. And then, of course, there are some that balance the two. Australia is a good example that is both a very good competitive nation at the top level, but also has great programs to support people who simply want to be active and get involved in sport, and maybe competition isn't for them.
You have referred to Australia, so they have a fantastic weather and we have a very cold weather. Do you think that weather is also a factor in the quality of the performance and also the performance itself?
I don't know whether the weather specifically. I mean, certainly it clearly determines which sports you take part in sometimes. Australia, I think they will forgive me for saying, don't perhaps have the best record in winter sports, although I stand to be corrected. But I think moreover it is the approach of governments, of charitable organisations, and really just of society in general, of how they view disabled people, especially children and young people, because if you can support those people into sport, get them active and motivate their interest to be sporty, then you're likely to retain that in later life. Whereas actually a lot of nations suffer from people dropping out of sport when they leave school, particularly sort of 16, 17 years old.
Any particular student you say that as a teacher I'm proud of, or any special athlete you have prepared for the international or national level?
Again, there's so many. Working in the UK, I began a role working across England in 2004, I think it was, and came across a number of young athletes, whether they were swimmers or track and field athletes and others. And that was at a time when athletes with a learning disability or intellectual disability couldn't take part in the Paralympic Games. At that time, there were no events for them on the programme. And it was something we were fighting hard to overcome, and we were working with organisations like the International Paralympic Committee, who determine the games and the competitive programme. And in 2012, in London, events for athletes with a learning disability appeared for the first time. And it was nice having seen some of the athletes that I'd met 5 or 10 years earlier working in England suddenly having that opportunity to compete in what is clearly the biggest event in disability sport, and the fact that it was on home soil, the fact that the British public got behind the Olympic and Paralympic Games, I think made it particularly special. So I wouldn't necessarily single out any particular athlete, but that group of athletes, I think, that were there in the 2000s when that Paralympic opportunity was out of reach, but kept going, kept competing, kept training, and really stuck with it in the hope that one day they might compete on the Paralympic stage. To see them do that was clearly very special.
So which country is at the moment at the highest rank in the medals and also in performance?
Across disability sport, obviously we saw the Rio Paralympic Games and Great Britain was right there up there in second place. And I'm pleased to say that athletes with a learning disability made up a good proportion of the medals in both the Great Britain and other teams in the medal table. But just as I said before, it goes back to those nations who have the best developed systems for supporting disabled people into sport that you tend to see in the top of competition, of course, and that's no great surprise. So you will always see the likes of Portugal, Australia, UK, France and others.
So what suggestions you have in your mind if we will say we want to suggest something ideal setup for the government? So what the government should do, so if we are sending a message across from this forum, so what message you would like to send to the central government?
I think when people think about Paralympic sport, it has picked up such an incredible following over the last few years, and that is absolutely to the credit of the International Paralympic Committee and the people who have driven that forward. But the Paralympic Games is only a part of disability sport. There are many sports open to people with an intellectual impairment that don't feature on that Games programme. And I guess what I would like to see is greater recognition for those. If you're a swimmer right now, you may have the opportunity, if you are the best in the world, to compete in the Paralympic Games. And of course, athletes are now looking towards Tokyo in a few years' time. But if you're a footballer, a tennis player, a skier, a basketball player, the highest you can ever go to is INAS, which is the organisation I now manage. As the International Federation, we organise an annual programme of international competition, of world and regional championships. And in all of those non-Paralympic sports, that is the highest accolade that an athlete can take away. But it doesn't get the recognition, perhaps, that other areas of sport do.
So what kind of assistance you provide to the third world countries like in Africa and Asia? So what benefit they can take it from your organisation?
Yeah. So we've grown very quickly over the last few years. When I joined in 2013, we had around 62 nations in membership, and that now stands at 82, which is a considerable increase. And the biggest part of that growth has been probably in Asia and in South America. In Asia, we've seen the first regional competitions taking place in the last few years, and it's great to see a lot of countries getting behind that structure and giving that opportunity. In South Central America, similarly, things are organised a little bit differently, and of course it is a huge area geographically, so travel can be a problem sometimes to get to competition and other things, but I'm really pleased to see in the last few years at least that that area of the world is starting to put a focus on athletes with an intellectual disability.
So what is the structure of this body? They get the finance from the UNO or from the private sponsorship? How it works?
We receive a fee from each of our members, which is a small amount each year, and we receive a small amount from each of the events that we run. So we try to make sure that we at least cover the costs of doing that. But by far the hardest part of my job is raising the funds, and I guess I'm not alone in saying that. But as an international organisation or an international charity, we're up against some very big, well-known organisations which also have to raise their funds for their respective causes. And whether we like it or not, charitable fundraising is a very competitive business. So yeah, we are always looking to work with companies, with organisations. even with individuals, small donations can make all the difference to us. And our website, which is inas.org, has all the various ways that people can get behind us. And even if it's not a financial contribution, if you're not in a position to donate or sponsor, then perhaps giving time or giving your expertise is a way that we can benefit. So there's lots of opportunities to get
So
involved.
what is your message for schools and children, especially how we can encourage students with the disabilities that they should come forward and participate in healthy activities and sports?
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. It is, those opportunities are there for you to get involved, and you don't have to be the best athlete in the world or the strongest or fastest runner, etc. Sport is something just to get involved with and enjoy, and if that's as far as you want to go, then that's perfectly fine by us. But if you do have the desire to compete and to put yourself against other athletes, then the competition pathways are there. They're not always easy to find, and there's still a lot of work to do, as I said, to raise the profile. But you can get to the world stage for those athletes that want to put the training in and go for the very top. So get involved and don't give up.
Structure-wise, so what is happening in the school and college and university levels? Do you think that there should be more work needs to be done, or it can be improved with the passage of time, or what are your suggestions on it?
Yeah, I think we've come to recognise in this country, as others have done, that university and post-school sport is particularly important for a lot of people. It's perhaps not quite so important for people with an intellectual disability, because the nature of their impairment means they're less likely to go to university. But as a general message, I think whatever level of organised sport can be offered at all stages, because once you leave school, perhaps that obvious support mechanism isn't there. If that support can be put in place, then you have a greater chance of staying active, being fit, and everything else.
And for encouragement for especially the people who are listening and watching this program, so what is your message, how they can help your organization and also the local schools for the sports activity, how they can participate in it?
Yep. So in terms of our organisation, we're always on the lookout for support, be that sponsor kind support or donations or other things, and there are ways to get involved, as I said, for people looking to perhaps volunteer their time and expertise. If it's for schools and for children looking to get involved in sport, then there are opportunities in Sheffield for you to get involved with. There are organisations both in England and across the UK that will answer questions and support you if you want to go that little bit further into competition, as I said before. And who knows, maybe one day we'll see you competing for Great Britain in an INAS competition, or maybe even the Paralympic Games.
Thank you very much, Nick.
Thank you.
I hope our viewers will enjoy this conversation. Viewers, I hope you have enjoyed this conversation. And in coming days, we will discuss more topics. But this is true that without a healthy society, without our healthy activities, we cannot build a strong society. And this is message from today's program. Goodbye from me. Thank you. Keep watching Sheffield Live.